The last part of 2 Corinthians seems to be written in a different manner from the first 9 chapters, so much so that some commentators believe that it is a different letter that has just been tacked on to the end. Now, I don't believe that at all. It appeals to me rather that Paul is turning to deal with residual problems caused by some teachers in Corinth who styled themselves the very chiefest apostles, chapter 11 verse 5, or the super apostles. Many were in fact false apostles, as Paul writes as in verse 13 of chapter 11. Now, the purpose of these chapters is to very pointedly warn the Corinthians against coming under their influence. We're going to read 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. Now I, Paul, myself, beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold toward you. But I beseech you that I may not be bold when I am present, with that confidence wherewith I think to be bold against some which think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. Imagine working hard at a job, giving it all the effort and energy that you possibly could, making sacrifices day and daily, only to see other people taking the credit and insinuating that your efforts were of little value, that you were actually more of a hindrance than a help. That was the situation that Paul faced at Corinth. Teachers had appeared in Corinth who considered themselves a cut above the rest. They thought very little of Paul and encouraged the Corinthians to ignore him. Indeed, they seemed to have been saying that Paul wasn't really an apostle at all, and even accused him of being carnal. Some which think of us as if we walked according to the flesh, in verse 2. Now, for this reason, Paul defends his apostleship in these 4 chapters. In nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles, though I be nothing, is what he writes in chapter 12, verse 12. Now, we might ask the question, why was it important to Paul that he defend his apostleship? Did he want them to remember that he was the boss? Now, we know that there are people who are keen to let others know about their qualifications and their titles and the university they went to because they're quite proud of themselves. Paul did not write about his apostolic authority in a personal sense, as if it was important to him that they recognize this authority. He wrote about it because it was important for them that they recognize his authority. It was actually for their benefit that they recognized that he was an apostle. And the reason is simple. The Lord had sent his apostles and given them a position of authority in the church for the benefit of others in the church. The Lord hath given us authority as apostles for edification and not for your destruction, he writes in verse 8. Paul repeats this later in the letter. The power, that is the authority which the Lord hath given me to edification, chapter 13, verse 10. If the Corinthians failed to recognize this, it would undermine what the Lord had established for their good. They would be shooting themselves in their foot. Now, one of the criticisms that the super apostles leveled against Paul, he describes in this way: who in presence am base among you, in verse 1, or in their own words, his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible, in verse 10. From these words, we can see that Paul was not overbearing or dictatorial when he was at Corinth. They thought it was a fault, but it was not. It reflected the meekness and gentleness of Christ, verse 1, a spirit that is essential in the service of God. Paul's unassuming manner was deliberate, not because of the absence of moral fibre or apostolic authority, but because he knew a better way of dealing with people. Paul did not want to be arrogant and domineering, perhaps like the super apostles. Not for that we have dominion over the faith, he writes in chapter 1, verse 24. But he would be bold. He would challenge those who accused him of acting as a man of the flesh. And that is the reason why Paul writes these 4 chapters at the end of 2 Corinthians.